All right, guys, welcome to episode 4. We're here at Glacier Distilling to prove that distilling alcohol is related to project management. Glacier Distilling produces a lot of craft whiskeys as well as other liqueurs, and I'm super excited to go in and check this one out. All right, welcome. I'm here at Glacier Distilling with Nick, who is the owner and founder. So tell us a little bit about Glacier Distilling.
Yeah, so we're a craft distillery. We started in 2010. The idea came from rafting by the old Duty homestead on the Middle Fork. Josephine Duty was a moonshiner back in the late 1800s, early 1900s.
Oh, that's a great story.
Yeah, she was kind of a pioneer of moonshining, and had quite the operation going on, and we thought that'd be fun to recreate, do something here, now that we have a permit to do it legally, of course. And it's kind of came as a little bit of a joke of preparing for the apocalypse, stockpiling some barrels of whiskey just in case. But we looked back at some traditional distillation and decided to recreate her recipe. Josephine's Moonshine, which we have out, is kind of a nod to her moonshining history, and then we started branching out from there. Make over 30 different products now out of this distillery. Sell in the tasting room here and throughout the state of Montana, and we have online distribution as well throughout the country, or quite a bit of the country. Yeah, it's just been a very organic and slow process. As good distillation is, it's always a matter of love and time, and getting it right, and then getting the products out. So
you mentioned permitting being a challenge. What happened there? How long did it take to be able to permit and get this place up and running?
It was painfully slow in the beginning. Even though it's not too long ago, the whole micro distillery permit and the whole process was relatively new to allow for this kind of permit. So, I mean, I think it took half a year to get the permits all lined up to do it, and you've got sourcing equipment and getting all that figured out. So we didn't start producing until very end of 2010, and we started the process kind of in January, that beginning of the year. So it took us about a year to get everything lined up to actually produce something. Now ongoing, distilling is federally regulated and state regulated, so we have to get approval for all the products we make and all the labels through the federal government, and then run that through the state as well. So ongoing, it's every time we have a new product out, we have to get that approved.
So when you say a new product, is that like just a slightly different blend of whiskey you have to get an approval for every
Pretty much,
one?
yeah.
Wow.
Any kind of anything that requires a label change, and we have to follow rules of what we can put into a label versus, into a bottle, make sure it matches the description on the label. So it's fairly heavily regulated. And then monthly tax reporting and production reporting. We basically have to be able to trace from grain to glass everything that we put into the bottle in each batch. Report that, of pounds raw material used and alcohol produced, and then pay the taxes accordingly. Yeah. Which all comes down to the tax payment.
Right.
Yeah.
That's incredible, though. I didn't even realize it was that strenuous, the amount of documentation that has to go into that. Do you do all of that yourself, or do you have somebody here that...
Yeah, I have help with that now.
Good.
Because eventually, very early on when we started distilling, we got the advice, well, make sure you plan your operation to be able to do all your distilling in 1 week, because the rest of the 3 weeks a month are going to be overhead and management and permitting.
Wow.
And I was like, that's crazy. It can't be that much. But, it's not far from the truth in reality of it.
Wow, guys, I knew that Montana regulations around alcohol were pretty strict, but I was actually surprised to hear that it was this strict. So think about what he has to do before he can even start distilling a spirit. He has to figure out what he's going to create, file paperwork with the state to get it approved, create a label for it, and then create a plan for what he's going to do to produce a product that meets those expectations that he filed with the state. So at the end, he has to check to make sure this meets those requirements. And if it does, great. But if it doesn't, he actually has to go back, as you'll find out later, and refile paperwork with the state as a result of it. So think about all of the upfront planning that he has to do to make sure that he's producing the right product, and the risk management that has to be in place if that product doesn't meet those expectations. But hey, isn't that what we do as project managers? Create a plan so we can meet those requirements and have a plan in place for what we're going to do when things go wrong.
Making the product is the fun part. We've got all the stills going, and we've produce here year round, but a good part of my time and a lot of resources we spend now are in sales, marketing, reporting, distribution, and all the somewhat less fun parts of producing whiskey. We still think of ourselves as craft, as artisan kind of production, and not necessarily full-scale manufacturing. So think of it more of a kitchen producing products, and we do a lot of very small batches, a lot of local ingredients, and sourcing is really important for us, where we get our products, where we get our cherries from Flathead Lake, sourcing local huckleberries, wild crafting spruce tips for the gin, and wormwood for the absinthe. That's all kind of local ingredients. So we source that, and things vary season to season, so we have to manage the flavor differences that we get from year to year and from crop to crop of all our ingredients. So it's an ongoing process of adapting to the new kind of environment and the how we can sell and where we can sell and so forth. Yeah.
So, do you sell mostly in Montana, or do you sell
primarily in Montana? So Montana has a tasting room, which is really the main way for craft breweries and distilleries to get their product in front of customers. And so we have a bar and a tasting room here where we sell a limited amount of our products. And then we work with the state. Montana is a state-controlled liquor system, so everything goes to the state of Montana and then to state-managed liquor stores or state-controlled liquor stores. And then from there, they go to the bars and restaurants or consumers from there.
Okay.
So we don't directly, except out of the tasting room, we don't directly sell to customers. We have to sell through the state to get our products into the hands of the end consumer.
So you sell to the state, and then the state sells to the restaurants and the liquor stores and those things. Okay,
yes.
Yeah, I thought I'd read about that, but I didn't quite understand.
And every state is different. So 50 states means 50 different ways that you sell alcohol across the country. And so we do have online distribution now. But again, we can't send directly to customers. So we have an online distributor partner that then gets the permits to be able to ship to various states. So we have a limited a number of our products that are available online as well, to anywhere between 30 to 40 states, depending on the changing rules of when you can and how you can ship.
All right. So talk me through, before we get started walking around. So you've come in, you've decided that you're going to brew some new spirit. What are the first steps you have to go through to get the people, the supplies, everything in place to get started that day?
I think the process for us is generally starts in research about, so distilling is an ancient practice. I mean, people have been distilling for a long time, and there's probably in the course of history, there were more products made than there are currently available now. There was a huge variety before Prohibition, even in the United States, of different local producers producing very niche and kind of products that were specific to the region, whatever fermentable materials we had, grain, fruits, or things like that. So we'll look back and decide on look at some techniques, some products that were being made, and look at the materials we have available here, kind of come up with a concept of something we want to make, a flavor that we want to produce, or a material we want to use. We'll do some test batches of that, figure out good suppliers of where we can get the ingredients. We'll run through test distillations, fermentations and distillations, do small batches of in-house testing. We'll usually have products that we then just sell in the tasting room directly, just to get more wider feedback. And once we find ones that meet a certain kind of interest out there, then we'll start scaling that up. And then that's another story of of scaling things is different from producing a very small batch, and so we have to tweak the recipes and process to get some volume production out of it. Glass to the product in, barrels to age it, labels, all that then kind of is an ongoing process throughout the product development cycle of getting something out there. Then once it's out there, obviously then getting people to try it, explain what it is. Distilling historically has been fairly opaque as far as the consumer doesn't usually know exactly what's in that bottle or doesn't really understand the process of how it got into there. Somewhat deliberately by some of the larger manufacturers of not really explaining, and the whole craft movement has really brought that to the forefront. So most producers, even the big guys now, are more transparent about grain bills, mash techniques, proof and age, and all the components that go into a product. And the consumers are more interested in learning about that too. So we try to provide, as much information about that as we can.
So how far in advance of a distilling day do you have to order all of your supplies and make sure you have everything in place?
So we have contracts with grain producers, malters, and so some of the products, depending on the kind of commodity you're using to produce it. So if it's a whiskey, for example, for our rye whiskey, we use a single origin rye. So it's all from one farm out of Montana that grows our rye crop. So that entire rye crop for the year is ours. So in some ways, it's planning a year ahead to say we want that crop of rye. We'll get it in, we'll get it milled, and then we'll start producing that. For the fruit, again, seasonally, cherry crops come once a year, so we have to plan on the timeline for harvesting that, getting that in, processing it, and producing something out of that. Certain products, then we can do more year-round. Gin, for example, or coffee liqueur, those ingredients are available kind of more steadily, so we'll plan a gin cycle or an absinthe production more to fit our production schedule rather than the availability of ingredients, because those keep and hold and you can get those ongoing. So each product, depending on what it is and what inputs needed, anywhere from a few months to a year out on planning that product.
Yeah. So you get all of this stuff in. When you're getting ready for the day that you're going to make something, what do you do? How many people do you have to have here helping you?
So we have a crew distillers. We have an operations manager, head distiller, and then kind of two others that are either bottling or helping with production. That's kind of the manufacturing side of things. And then we have sales and marketing and tasting room staff as well.
Wow. All right. Well, show me around. I'm going to ask some questions as we go.
Okay. So the process starts, it's kind of hoses everywhere. Watch your step. Kind of taking you to this corner, this stainless steel pot is the mash cooker. And so this is where the whole process starts. We have a grain room on the other side of the wall. We'll be milling the grain and putting it into basically it's a giant pot. For whiskeys, the process is basically to create a mash, which is a beer, essentially. It's a grain in beer, so all the grain is in there. But we're creating a product that we can ferment. So any distillation it doesn't actually create any alcohol. It's called in distillation. All the alcohol is created in the first step, which is the fermentation. So you're either making a beer or a wine or some other kind of fermented product to start with, and then you're distilling that to concentrate the alcohols.
I didn't realize that. Okay.
Yeah. So any whiskey is basically distilled from grain, and to make a whiskey, you have to start by making a beer first. So the first whiskeys were really based off of beer. So the brewers would use the malted barley, ferment that, and make a beer. Then you take that beer and you distill it, and you have a malt whiskey, which is kind of the Scotch was the original, probably one of the earlier whiskeys styles out there, and that's a malted barley kind of grain-based spirit. We do rye here, and we do bourbon, which is corn. So you're taking one of those grains or a combination recipe of them, cooking them to break down the starches, convert that to sugars, that the yeast can then ferment. In these wooden vats here, and there's one behind that unit, we do what's called an open fermentation. So it's just that whole grain recipe in a big vat, inoculated with some yeast, and they ferment out to a distiller's beer or a wort that we then distill. So that's the mash tank there. We'll run it through what you see here is a heat exchanger to heat, cool, and get that mash ready for the right environment and temperature for the yeast. Once it's fermented, it'll go into a still. This is one of the stills we have. We have 4 different stills in the building that we use depending on the stage of the process or the type of product we're producing. We run all pot stills here, which are kind of the most rudimentary of stills, but give us the most flexibility and control. We'll take that fermented mash, put it in the still, heat that up slowly. The magic of distillation is that alcohol boils at a lower temperature than water.
What temperature does it boil at, do you know?
So water boils at 212 degrees at sea level. At elevation, it's a little lower temperature. Ethanol is about 170-ish degrees. And so when you heat that up, the alcohol, for the most part, will evaporate off first, and then water comes next. But it's not a one step, it's a gradient of that. So that alcohol-heavy vapors will go off when you're heating it really slowly. You can capture those vapors, recool them, and recondense them into a liquid form, and then that's your concentrated alcohol. And that's what we're after. We're concentrating the alcohol that was in that fermented product. Along with the alcohol comes all the flavors that carry with it, because it's not a perfect distillation, not a perfect extraction of alcohol. And so the flavors, that kind of imperfect distillation, would give you the flavors and characteristics of that finished spirit. So we'll distill it, collect that concentrated alcohol, which is then your unaged whiskey or the base for your gins or vodkas or liqueurs or things like that. And then that either gets barrel aged for a number of years or then further processed into whatever we're making.
Okay. And how long does it take to get through this and then over to here?
So the mashing process itself takes about a day.
Okay.
So we're using, our batch is about 1,200 pounds of grain. We'll make about 1,000 gallons of mash. The heat up process, cooking it, holding it at a certain temperature, bringing it down. It's about a day's work. That'll go into a fermenter. We'll add the yeast, and the yeast will work in roughly 3 to 5 days. We'll have a finished fermentation. Breweries, people might be more familiar with, usually a slower, longer fermentation process. But for distillers, we're looking for kind of a faster conversion. And we're also have a process of heating it afterwards. So the whole kind of flavor development in beer is a little bit different than the alcohol production for alcohol. So the fermentation and the yeast strains that we're using are a little more active. So a day to mash, 3 to 5 days to ferment. And then the distillation, we do double distillations at least. So it's kind of a 2-day process to distill everything down again. So a week end to end to get something from a grain or a fruit to a distilled product.
Wow.
And then it goes into, again, further processing or aging after that. And
Yeah.
the bulk of the time then is the time the liquid stays in a barrel to age for a whiskey. For maceration, for liqueurs, it might sit on the fruit for over the winter or several months to extract all the flavors we want out of there. So not a super fast process, but once we get into the rhythm of it, every day we're year-round, we're mashing and fermenting and distilling and then putting stuff away to sell when it's ready at a later date.
So is it about the same process every time, the same steps that you have to take, just maybe some different ingredients if you're doing something with huckleberries or cherries or
pretty
something
much.
like that?
I mean,
Okay.
it's a pretty much a basic, you take a raw ingredient, you process it to some degree, you ferment it, you distill it, and then you do something with it at the end and then put it into a bottle.
And you said about 1 week from start to finish.
For a whiskey base, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So it turns out that distilling alcohol is actually a multi-year waterfall project. Think about it. They do the same steps over and over, right? We've got low uncertainty. We've got a clear scope. We could create a checklist that we follow over and over again for filing paperwork with the state, putting a plan together for what we're going to produce, building a label for it, spending a week creating this whiskey base. But then we have to decide next steps. Are we mixing it with fruit to create some kind of brandy? Are we going to age it in a barrel? And the barrel aging process can take up to 3 years. So think about the steps along the way and the checkpoints that they have to make sure things are going the way they expect. So it's really cool when you think about it that this is just a multi-year waterfall project where they can follow the same steps and hopefully get to the result that they expect.
Okay. And how does everybody know when it's time to move something? Is there a timer, or they set an alarm? They know from the smell? How do you know?
All of the above.
Okay.
So, a lot of it is time and temperature controlled. So we know how long we want it to sit at a certain temperature. We'll do some readings of sugar extraction and things along the way. And then during the distillation, it's also a combination of time and temperature to know when we're at certain points of the process.
So it's kind of like cooking. After a while, you kind of know when something is likely done, but you know about how much time it's going to take.
Exactly. And we have done this, for over almost 14 years now. And so every time we have a pretty good system going of how we're doing it. Anytime we upsize or add different equipment, then we have to adjust the process a little bit depending on the exact equipment we're using. But really, it's not a complicated process. It's just a consistency of doing it the same way. You can do it a lot of different ways and get different results. And that's not necessarily a good or bad thing. It's just a style or a kind of flavor that we're trying to achieve. So consistency of doing it the same way is also important. Almost more important than exactly the way you do it. As long as you do it the same way each time, you'll get a repeatable result. And so we've kind of figured out the way we want to have our products taste, and so we just keep repeating that once we figured out that process.
Have you ever had one that just turned out completely differently than you expected?
More than I'd like to admit. Depending on where things diverge from our optimal. If we have a fermentation, yeast is a wild organism. It's a natural process. We can have yeast that don't feel very happy that day and have a slow start, so we might be able to continue kind of reheat it or re-get that fermentation going or get it to work. If it just goes really sour or goes off, we sometimes have to dump the product and start over. Fortunately, like if we do have a fermentation that goes off, the grain and the yeast, when we're done cooking it, we have a farmer that takes it for feed, because it still has a lot of nutrients, or for fertilizer on fields. So we still, it's an organic product, so we can divert that back to its end disposal source, sometimes prematurely more than we want to, but it has an outlet. Sometimes we just have to dump it if it really doesn't go the way we want it to.
Have you ever had a time where it went differently than you expected, but it actually turned out better?
Yeah, there have been mistakes made along the way that have been happy errors. And so we've had one product that we didn't like the way it turned out. And we did some filtration on it, and it turned out we discovered a process and another product that we could make that actually benefited from some of the flavors that some of the kind of quote-unquote mistake that we made along the way. Didn't make the product we were intending, but gave us an opportunity to make a different product. We've had times where, because we're working with so many different products, sometimes we get some, if something hasn't been properly, or we add too much, too many botanicals in the gin basket and the flavor is off balance. And then we kind of look at the flavor profile there and maybe add something to it, make a different liqueur out of it or something else like that. For the most part, though, we try to minimize that, obviously. But sometimes we take advantage of those situations and try to flex our creative muscles and see what else we can do or learn from it and see what kind of outcome we can get using it, taking that and running with it in a little bit different direction.
So I have to ask, if it turns out a little differently than you expect, do you have to refile all the paperwork with us?
Oops, guys, a little intermission here. My camera overheated while I was there. The answer to that question, though, yes. Yes, you do have to refile all the paperwork with the state.
Obviously, the goal is to kind of make a product that's consistent, and that's what we strive for. So we're probably our hardest critics on. We notice the small differences from batch to batch and bottling to bottling. And I think if you try them side by side, we batch number and bottle number everything. Part of the fun about craft is that you get to taste and see some of the variations from season to season. And batch to batch. So we kind of, at some points, lean into it a little bit with that batching process. But we are also trying to create a consistent product that that you get what you are expecting out of that bottle, out of that label. So, the reason we might diverge if something has a different flavor profile is just to make sure we keep a quality control on what we do put out.
Yeah. So, and I wanted to bring up that smell that you're getting in the air, because they're not going to be able to smell this on the camera. Yeah. It's like a sweet beer whiskey kind of scent. It's kind of intoxicating.
Yeah. I mean, mash days are great because, well, other than the heat it puts off in the summer, in the winter it's cozy warm. It's, we're using organic grains and water, and it cooks up. So you get this baked bread, beer, fermentation kind of smell in here. When we're doing fruits and other products, you get all that great cooked apple if we're doing the apple brandy or cherries, and it's a very sensory process here.
Yeah. So the first one we were looking at, you said, was a rye. There's a malt going over here, and you said this is an apple brandy. Is the process different? Because they're different things, I see.
Yeah, they look quite different. The fundamental process is the same. So with the apples, we get Honeycrisp apples from Moss Farms in Rollins. So it's a local apple. And to make an apple brandy, you have to take apples, you basically press them to make a apple juice, you ferment that to make an apple cider, and then you distill that into your apple brandy. So the whole process is the same. It's a little bit mechanically different because apples versus grain you got to grind up and press the apples versus the grain doesn't have the liquid juice in it. So it's a little bit different, but basically you're creating a sweet liquid for the yeast to ferment. And so that process is the same. And then the still that you see here is an old cognac still. So it was designed really to bring out big round flavors, particularly of brandy for cognac, for fruit distillations. So it has the same principle. You heat the liquid up, you extract off the alcohol and flavor profile that you want, and you condense it down again and capture that liquid at the other end. In this case, you get all the flavors of the apple that come through to make your apple brandy. But the fundamental process of fermentation and distillation is the same, no matter what product you're making. It's just maybe a little bit different kind of processing or timing of fermentation or how the distillation temperature and time takes.
This is awesome, just hearing everything that goes into this, and you're so calm about it, like you just know how everything works at this point. So it's been through its 1 week process, let's say. What do you do once it's ready? What are the next steps from here?
So everything that we produce is distilled in this room that you see here, so 4 different stills depending on the style. You see everything here, a lot of small tanks on wheels. We have, as different products, we have to have flexibility in our equipment. But once it comes off the still as an finished alcohol, then we have to decide, is it going to go into a barrel to become an aged whiskey? Is it going to go on fruit to become a liqueur? We're going to redistill it again with botanicals to do a gin. So we'll take that, and after that, take it to the next step. We have the majority of our production goes to whiskey, and so we'll put things into barrels. This is one of our barrel rooms. We have some barrel warehouses, but this is kind of the prized room where all the barrels that we're ready to harvest and bottle come here, rest here for the last little bit before we process them. So whiskeys, and so the major next step after distilling is then aging or putting something into the barrel. The barrels you see here range from 15-gallon, which are quarter casks. We use a lot of those. Smaller barrels for a rye whiskey and different products that we don't do as big of a volume of. And then the bigger barrels are the ones on racks there are kind of the 52-gallon kind of standard bourbon barrel size. We have some 60-ish gallon wine barrel kind of size formats in here as well, depending on the product. And then pretty much once we just commit to putting something in the barrel, it's in the barrel for 3 years.
3 years.
At the shortest. The smaller barrels have more surface area to volume. They have a different kind of interaction and aging cycle. The bigger barrels have a different kind of ratio to wood to liquid. The environment, the heat, the humidity, all that plays into the aging time. And so barrel management then becomes a really big part of the process. You might have one batch that you produce and you split into 10 different barrels when you barrel it. Over time, those barrels may develop differently just because of the one stave of wood that has a particular flavor, or where it's sitting in the rack house, or different influences could affect how it ages. And so then we taste and monitor the barrels as they go on, and then when we get to bottling, we'll maybe either bottle a single barrel at a time, or we'll mix a few different barrels together to create a batch that has a flavor profile that we want. And so this is kind of the low, long, slow process. The good thing is that in theory, everything gets better as it ages. So if you don't sell it, you just let it sit and get more valuable. But the downside of letting it sit and age is that oak, which all these barrels for the most part are, is a great material to store liquid. It has a lot of flavor that is contributed into the whiskey from the oak. But and the oxidation that happens in the barrel is good for flavor development, but it's not a perfect watertight, airtight container. So you get loss, evaporative loss, called the angel share, what leaves the barrels. Angels in Montana are pretty thirsty. We lose in our average loss in the first 3 years is about 18 to 22% out of the barrel. So
I love that though. Angels in Montana are pretty thirsty.
Yeah. The dry climate, pulls a lot more of the water out of the barrels, just because osmotic pressure, and it tries to balance out. And so you do get loss. You get flavor development as well. So it's a balance of trying to age things for long enough to get the flavor profile you want, the oxidation you want, the flavor development you want without losing too much. Some things we let go. We have some barrels in here that have been aging for over 10 years and they're half full. And you're like, well, it's kind of getting better, but maybe not. Where's the cutoff where it's not practical to continue aging? Some things that we really like the flavor of the raw material, like the apple brandy or some of the ryes that are really spicy and peppery and grain forward. We may not really want to have it in the barrel for that long because we don't want that barrel to take over, or we want certain fresh flavors to kind of stay in the forefront, so we'll manage that by product. Barrels themselves, these are all oak barrels. Most of them come out of Minnesota, a slow growth white oak, pretty dense grain, which helps on the loss, contributes a kind of unique flavor profile to it. Oak is a species, but oak grown in Kentucky or down in the South, or oak grown in up north, or oak grown in France, they all have a little bit of a different flavor profile to them. And then the way you finish the barrel too, whether you toast it or char it, develops the flavor that's in the oak differently too. So cooperage and that whole process is a huge part of it, especially in American style whiskeys. Bourbons, 75-80% of the flavor arguably is just from the oak barrel. So the oak in that aging process is a huge factor in that process. And keeping track of all that and managing all that inventory is a big part of what we do as well. We have huge kind of a computer program that kind of tags all the barrels and tracks their age, and as we make notes and tasting notes, we record loss and flavor changes and stuff throughout the process.
So how do you know when a barrel's at its end of life?
Well, there's an old saying that the oak is the barrel. The life of the barrel is as long as the age of the tree when it was harvested.
Huh.
So in theory, there's no lifetime to an oak barrel. If it's treated well, it could be used forever. The difference is that if you use that barrel for the first time, for example, bourbons and rye whiskeys by law have to be aged in a virgin or new fill oak barrel. It couldn't have had anything else in them. When you put that first spirit in there, it extracts all that oak flavor out of that barrel, that oak extract, the sugars, the caramels, some of the nut spices and wood spices that you get out of the oak that are in the spirit are extracted and then gone from that barrel. So you refill that barrel with what would be the same, bourbon base into a second use barrel. You're not going to get the flavor profile out that you did the first time. So although the barrel itself is still fine, the flavor it has diminishes over time. And so we do our rye whiskeys and our bourbons in a new barrel, and then our second fill of the barrel then would be for our single malts, which we are more focused on the grain flavor and less of a barrel impact on it. And then the third use or fourth use would be an apple brandy or rum, or we barrel age our gins and agave in barrels that have been used multiple times. It'll pick up flavors from what was in the barrel previously. And so you can have products that are aged in one barrel and finished in another to pick up different flavor components.
How many empty barrels and filled barrels do you generally have on hand at a given time?
We've got a few thousand barrels.
Wow.
Yeah. And different ages and states of use. Once the barrels are empty and we don't really have a practical use for them, we often sell them off to breweries or other distilleries that have a different product that they want even more of a neutral barrel for, or at the very, very end of life, furniture and decor and other fun products, smoking chips. And one of the best briskets I've ever made has been smoked with an old ground up whiskey barrel chips.
Ooh, that's cool.
Yeah, it was pretty fun to have a full circle there. But
so I've been dying to ask, what's in this big giant one?
What's in this big giant one is a good question. Let's see.
By the way, while he's looking that up, it smells like a combination of wood and whiskey in here that is amazing.
So that is a tank of our Bear Proof Huckleberry Whiskey.
Okay.
It's been pulled out of a barrel and processed and got to the point where it's going to be bottled here soon. So this is just staged, ready to be bottled.
So how do you know which ones of these you think are going to sell most or be most interesting or successful? What do you think?
Well, we've hit the mark a few times. We've missed the mark quite a few times. I think part of it is just looking at industry trends and what people are interested in. Obviously, like huckleberries, for example, very regional kind of item that has a lot of tourist appeal, and people in Montana love their huckleberries. Other products, such as the single malt we're doing, we're seeing a big movement, especially in the U.S., to develop an American single malt product range. And so we're seeing a lot of attention on that sector. So we've been trying to put more of that away over the last few years. Some of the products we just, like the flavor of personally, and, probably you wouldn't pick them out in the liquor store yourself. But if you come to the tasting room, you have the opportunity to try something you might not have bought elsewhere. And I think that's kind of what we gear ourselves for here is you're on vacation, you're open to new experiences, and you might as well try something that you didn't have. You wouldn't just be drinking at home. And so that gives us an opportunity to kind of guide people that come in here to try something that might be out of their normal wheelhouse. And what sells is really the passion that our staff, bartenders, or anybody out working in the tasting room has for that particular product. If you have that story and the explanation behind it, you enjoy it much more. No matter what it is. And so we're able to help people find what they like. Whiskeys are our biggest moving product, but we do a lot of gin, and we do liqueurs that are for people that prefer something a little sweeter, or maybe a wine drinker crossing over into spirits and have that kind of flavor profile in their minds. And then we do a lot of mixology and cocktail development to show how you can use these. The spirits are an ingredient and they have their own flavor, but just like an ingredient, when you cook with it, if you mix it with the right things, fresh ingredients or citrus or other sweeteners or just a whole way of preparation, you can create a whole new kind of product out of that. And so in many ways, spirits for us are ingredients to create other products down the road at the point of service.
So you mentioned earlier quality control. What kinds of things do you do before these go out to your bar or to the state to sell to make sure that everything is as you expect it to be?
I drink it all.
I like that.
Honestly, a lot of it is just taste testing and checking. There's few parameters for proof and sugar content and pH that we can monitor to make sure we're in a certain range that
How
we
do you
expect.
monitor that?
With hydrometers or pH meters and different scientific instruments that we can use. Visually, you look at color and you look at mouthfeel when you're tasting it. The biggest driver for quality control for us is our nose, and so you can smell a whole lot more than you can taste, and so you train yourself to just observe all the smells that you have in that product, and you can know pretty quickly where you are in the process, and where you are with quality just by smelling it. And then we rely on the fact that we were making it in a consistent manner, aging it and storing it in a consistent manner. So we're already in that really close range of where we want to be. And then we can do the final tweaks with whiskey, in particular by blending across different barrels or finding barrels that have, this one has a little more cinnamon, this one's a little sweeter, and then we want to hit somewhere in the middle, and we can pick barrels and manage it that way. It's a lot of hands-on tasting and evaluation.
When you're making the same things over and over, I assume that there's some amount of like lessons learned where you make one batch and you realize, I think we want to change this a little for the next one. Do you guys keep track of that and just continuously adjust? Or?
We do. We've been continually adjusting since we started, and we're still learning. We still aren't exactly where we want to be, and I think in 20 years we still won't be exactly where we want to be. We just incrementally try to make adjustments.
All right.
It's a slow, long process. We're in it for the long haul. The way we built the business is very slow and steady growth, and knowing that we are going to be learning along the way. So we allow for that too in our product development and testing, and we do a lot of pilot projects that we do have a lot of barrels. You said, asked earlier about things that went wrong. We also have a lot of things that went very right, but we're not necessarily commercializing them either, and they're just a learning thing. Oh, this distills this way and does really well, and so we have a lot of project barrels that one day we'll do something with, maybe not, and they're just sitting there, hoping for a life at some point. But so that's something to look forward to in the future. We'll figure out how to dig one of those barrels out and do something with it. The limitations of how many products you can have out and where you can sell it and things like that also play a factor in how much we can do and how we have to approach it from a business perspective, not just I wish I could make all these things. We also have to then, like you were asking earlier, like what sells. Well, we do look feedback, what sells in the market, what leads us to spend the most amount of time and energy are in the end of the day on things that we're able to sell, but then give us the room to play and experiment.
So we've got the barrels. Do you guys bottle here, or do you?
This is the bottling area here, and Henry over there is filling bottles. Everything is bottled off of that vacuum bottling system. Different products have different filtration and prep work that need to be done before they're ready to go into a bottle. What you're seeing Henry bottle here today is Mule Kick, and Mule Kick is one of our most kind of off-the-wall products, but it's one of our oldest products and has a very niche audience that are very passionate about it.
It's an odd color. What is it exactly?
Jalapeno, garlic, and black pepper corn. So it's our unaged rye whiskey that we put over. Instead of going into a barrel, we dump it into a big vat of jalapenos, garlic, and peppercorns, and it picks up that green color is just the jalapeno in it. All natural product. Big spice heat to it, kind of a savory, pepperiness. We developed it for a very specific purpose, which was to make our Caesars, spicy Caesars or Bloody Marys. And it became, people that tried it in that, appreciated that, and then have started enjoying it on its own or in other products, spicy margaritas. and other applications for it. It's also one that's fun just to say, hey, give it, it's a hot pepper product. You got to be in a certain mind. It gets you in a certain mindset if you have a drink of that. But the bottling process is pretty manual. We have, because of the number of products we have and the different bottle styles and filtration that we need to do, for at our scale, that automation was kind of out of our reach at this point. So unfortunately, it's a very labor-intensive product for that aspect of it. But it gives us, final quality check on it. Then we apply labels and put it into boxes and ship it out from there.
Do you actually just ship a certain amount to the state, or do they order from you whenever they know what they want?
A combination, depending on the product. Some products are we have a standing order, a standing inventory at the warehouse because they know those are selling. Some are special order. Some are seasonal releases and promotional products that we put out on a limited basis. And we do some products that are specific to a specific store or a customer that wants a single barrel or a particular type of product.
So how do you know when it's time to start the next batch? Are you just watching your inventory to see when it's getting low?
Yeah, pretty much. We maintain inventory kind of based on projections and previous sales, and do our bottling schedule based on what we think we're going to need. We're pretty seasonal in Montana. Obviously, with the big summer season is the selling season for us. In the spirits world in general, October, November, December is probably the biggest season. So we migrate from on-premise sales to more distribution kind of in those months, and the product mix changes a little seasonally. But we'll try to, in the winter for us in particular, get ahead, stockpile things for the summer as much as we can as well. So a lot of inventory management that has to be taken into consideration when we're doing all this, and staffing up and down because it's such a labor-intensive product to have enough people to...
One person creating all of these bottles.
Yeah. So we'll have one person up to 3 people, 4 people bottling, depending on, how much we need to get out in a day.
Think about the project constraints that he has here. So he's already mentioned that being a smaller operation, he can't negotiate prices the way a lot of larger operations would. But also think about producing small batch liquor on site, because he's only got so much that he can store. So he's got the aging barrels and the empty barrels that he's got to figure out where he can keep. He's got bottles that he's got to figure out, are we selling enough that I need to produce more inventory? Or what do I do with the ones that aren't selling? And then he's even bottling on site. So he's got a constraint around how many people can I have in place and how many bottles can I produce at one time. So think about all of the constraints that he has to live within to move forward with this small batch bottling process. It's kind of cool when you think about it, isn't it?
When you don't really think about everything that goes into it either, because you've got the equipment, you've got the grains, corn, whatever you need, plus water, and any other flavors that you've got in, plus the bottles. And there are different bottles for different ones, right?
Yeah.
Which mean different corks for different ones.
Exactly.
So you have a lot of stuff, and the barrels.
Yeah.
So you've got a lot of stuff you have to keep an eye on and keep in stock.
And you asked earlier about lead time for raw materials, lead time for glass, and lead time for corks and packaging and printing labels. Those are all, often fairly long processes. So we do have to plan quite a far ahead, and we've had supply chain struggles, just as everyone has, especially coming out of COVID era where things were hard to get and timelines were long and different materials weren't available. So we had to be flexible on a lot of that too. Again, at our size, purchasing power is a limited muscle we can flex because we are only buying a relatively small amount compared to a lot of packaged goods. So we have to account for that as well.
All right. Well, is this the end of the line on the tour, or is there something else we need to see?
This is basically the end of the tour. We cooked it, distilled it, aged it, and bottled it. I guess the end of the tour is then the tasting room where you get to taste it.
I'm definitely going to be heading to the tasting room. So this has been so much fun. I could actually pelt you with 1,000 questions right now if I wanted to, but we'll leave it alone at this point. Sure. Maybe if I think of some more, we'll come back one day and do this again.
Yeah, feel free to come back.
Yeah, well, this has been awesome. There you have it, guys. This is Nick, and we are at Glacier Distilling.
Thank you.
guys, and there you have it. Distilling alcohol is, in fact, project management. We had stakeholder management, risk management, quality control, a step-by-step repeatable process like a waterfall project that you do over and over again, lessons learned. And there are regulatory requirements that they have to follow, quite strenuous ones. So I'm excited to tell you that distilling alcohol is actually project management. I'm going to step in here and do some tastings, which I've been looking forward to, and I'll let you know what I like best.